Book 3, Chapter 7 of The Cinema Murder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mary Rohde. The Cinema Murder by E. Phillips Oppenheim. Book 3, Chapter 7. Something of his overnight optimism remained with Philip when at 11 o'clock on the following morning he was ushered into Elizabeth's rooms. It was a frame of mind, however, which did not long survive his reception. From the moment of his arrival he seemed to detect a different atmosphere in his surroundings. The demeanor of Phoebe, his staunch ally, who admitted him without her usual welcoming smile, the unanalyzable sense of something wanting in the dainty little room, overfilled with strong-smelling hothouse flowers in the entrance, and welcome of Elizabeth herself. His eyes had ached for the sight of her. He was so sure that he would know everything the moment she spoke. Yet her coming brought only confusion to his senses. She was different, unexpectedly, bewilderingly different. She had lost that delicate serenity of manner, that almost protective affection which he had grown to lean upon and expect. She entered, dressed for the street, smoking a cigarette, which was in itself unusual, with dark rings under her eyes, which seemed to be looking all round the room on some pretext or other, but never at him. "Am I late?" she asked, a little breathlessly. "I am so sorry. Tell me, have you anything particular to do?" "Nothing," he answered. "I want to go out of the city, into the country, at once," she told him feverishly. "The car is waiting. I ordered it for 11:15. Let us start." "Of course, if you wish it," he assented. He opened the door, but before she passed through he leaned towards her. She shook her head. His heart sank. What could there be more ominous than this? "I am not well," she muttered. "Don't take any notice of anything I say or do for a little time. I am like this sometimes. Temperamental, I suppose. All great actresses are temperamental. I suppose I am a great actress. Do you think I am, Philip?" He was following her downstairs now. He found it hard, however, to imitate the flippancy of her tone. "The critics insist upon it," he observed dryly. "Evidently your audience last night shared their opinion." She nodded. "I love them to applaud like that. And yet audiences don't really know, do they? Perhaps—" She relapsed into silence, and they took their places in the car. She settled herself down with a little sigh of content, and drew the rug over her. "As far as you can go, John," she told the man, "but you must get back at 6 o'clock. The country, mind, not the shore." They started off. "So you were there last night," she murmured, leaning back amongst the cushions with an air of relief. "I was there for a few moments. I wrote my note to you in the box office." She shook the memory away. "And afterwards?" "I went to one of the clubs downtown." "What did you do there?" she inquired. "Gossip?" "Some of the men were very kind to me," he said. "I had supper with Noel Bridges, amongst others." "Well?" she asked almost defiantly. "I don't understand." She looked intently at him for a moment. "I forgot," she went on. "You are very chivalrous, aren't you? You wouldn't ask questions. See, I am going to close my eyes. It is too horrible here, and all through Brooklyn. When we are in the lanes I can talk. This is just one of those days I wish that we were in England. All our country is either suburban or too wild and restless. Can you be content with silence for a little time?" "Of course," he assured her. "Besides, you forget that I am in a strange country. Everything is worth watching." They passed over Brooklyn Bridge, and for an hour or more they made slow progress through the wide flung environs of the city. At last, however, the endless succession of factories and small tenement dwellings lay behind them. They passed houses with real gardens, through stretches of wood whose leaves were opening, whose branches were filled with the sweet smelling sap of springtime. Elizabeth seemed to wake almost automatically from a kind of stupor. She pushed back her veil, and Philip, stealing eager glances towards her, was almost startled by some indefinable change. Her face seemed more delicate, almost the face of an invalid, and she lay back there with half-closed eyes. The strength of her mouth seemed to have dissolved, and its sweetness had become almost pathetic. There were signs of a great weariness about her. The fingers which reached out for the little speaking tube seemed to have become thinner. "Take the turn to the left, John," she instructed. "The one to Bay Shore. Go slowly by the lake, and stop when I tell you." They left the main road and traveled for some distance along a lane which, with its bramble-grown fences and meadows beyond, was curiously reminiscent of England. They passed a country house, built of the wood which was still a little unfamiliar to Philip, but wonderfully homelike with its cluster of outbuildings, its trim lawns, and the turret clock over the stable entrance. Then, through the leaves of an avenue of elms, they caught occasional glimpses of the blue waters of the lake, which they presently skirted. Elizabeth's eyes travelled over its placid surface idly, yet with a sense of passive satisfaction. In a few minutes they passed into the heart of a little wood, and she leaned forward. "Stop here, close to the side of the road, John. Stop your engine, please, and go and sit by the lake." The man obeyed at once with the unquestioning readiness of one used to his mistress' whims. For several minutes she remained silent. She had the air of one drinking in with almost passionate eagerness the sedative effect of the stillness, the soft spring air, the musical country sounds, the ripple of the breeze in the trees, the humming of insects, the soft splash of the lake against the stony shore. Philip himself was awakened into a peculiar sense of pleasure by this, almost his first glimpse of the country since his arrival in New York. A host of half-forgotten sensations warmed his heart. He felt suddenly intensely sympathetic, perhaps more genuinely tender than he had ever felt before towards the woman by his side, whose hour of suffering it was. His hand slipped under the rug and held her fingers, which clutched his in instantaneous response. Her lips seemed unlocked by his slight action. "I came here alone 2 years ago," she told him, "and since then often. Sometimes to study a difficult part, sometimes only to think. One moment." She released her fingers from his, drew out the hatpins from her hat, unwound the veil and threw them both on to the opposite seat. Then she laid her hands upon her forehead as though to cool it. The little breeze from the lake rippled through her hair, bringing them every now and then faint whiffs of perfume from the bordering gardens. "There," she exclaimed, with a little murmur of content. "That's a man's action, isn't it? Now I think I'm getting brave. I have something to say to you, Philip." He felt her fingers seeking his again, and held them tightly. It was curious how in that moment of crisis his thoughts seemed to wander away. He was watching the little flecks of gold in her hair, wondering if he had ever properly appreciated the beautiful curve of her neck. Even her voice seemed somehow attuned to the melody of their surroundings, the confused song of the birds, the sighing of the lake, the passing of the west wind through the trees and shrubs around. "Philip," she began, clinging closely to him, "I have brought you here to tell you a story which perhaps you will think, when you have heard it, might better have been told in my dressing room. Well, I couldn't. Besides, I wanted to get away.